some of you decide. But,
That's right. We'll still be so entertained until those desperate.
Okay, on that note. Good, thank you.
Right.
Thank you very much. This is great. And there's still some places for people over here.
If you're not in second grade or fifth, sorry, the
There you
teacher will
go.
see you.
I think it's book the grace for.
Well, it's a pleasure to welcome all of you all and to welcome our distinguished visitor today. This is not her first appearance, I should tell you, here at the Foundation Impact Research Group seminars. She was among the first who came. This is, I think, her third visit, if I remember correctly. This is the 10th year of these seminars going on, and ever since the founding in 2003. It's a privilege to have had Rebecca and a number of other guests here as well. Most of you, I expect, know a bit about Rebecca and Pew Charitable Trust. Pew Charitable Trust started as 7 trusts, which they operated like it was one trust for a while, but not to the fullest extent that they would have liked to have done it. And they petitioned the IRS, to give you some sense about this, they petitioned the IRS to allow them to report as one trust. And the IRS thought about it and came back and said, no, you can't do that. You're 7 trusts, and you have to report as 7 trusts. Whereupon Rebecca and her lawyers thought about this for a couple of years, and they went back to the IRS and said, well, since we're 7 trusts, that would enable us to qualify as a public charity. And so we can convert from being a private foundation to a public charity. Because after all, a lot of the things we want to do are close to the edge of where foundations operate, and our lawyers tell us you can't do that, or maybe you can't do that, or what. In any event, so lo and behold, the IRS approved the conversion of it's a public matter. Public matter. It's been in the press a lot. So here you had this very successful private foundation convert to being a public charity. And that's one of the questions I'd like to ask Rebecca to talk about as we go through this, but she's going to make some remarks about them anyway. What I frankly had forgotten about it, I've known Rebecca almost since she first got to the Pew Charitable Trust, because she somehow got me drafted into doing an evaluation for the Conservation Foundation, which I knew nothing about. Why she got me to do it, I have no idea. All I know is that I ended up writing a long report on the program of the Conservation Foundation. It's a major conservation and environmental initiative. But what I'd forgotten about it was that she really was exemplary in the field of public health. She was the first nurse to hold a faculty position at the University of Virginia's medical school, and she serves as an assistant professor in the Department of Neurosurgery. She was head nurse of the emergency department at the University of Virginia Hospital. She's authored numerous articles on head injury. I didn't know this until I read what they sent me from this. She's a recipient of the Distinguished Nursing Alumni Award from UVA and the UVA Women's Center Distinguished Alumni Award. But the point is that she arrived at the Pew Charitable Trust in 1983 as a junior, I think maybe the only staff member, wasn't it? One of 3 staff members. And within the space of 5 years, she became executive director of the Pew Charitable Trust. And she then, the expansion went, during her tenure, from 10 employees to more than 750 located throughout the United States and on environmental projects around the world. What is really interesting to me about what Rebecca has done at Pew Trust is that, in the first place, and she may be willing to talk a little bit about this, she has sometimes in the past, the board of the Pew Trust was primarily family, maybe exclusively family, I think, when you got there. The Pew family. They were not interested in publicity. They basically hid behind the transom and had proposals come in over the transom, as we would say, and acted on them. They were not known for being venturesome. Many people who know them, I only knew one member of the family, but they were fairly conservative. And within the space of, I would say, 10 years, Rebecca had gotten them involved in a wide range of initiatives that are, I think, pace-setting with respect to what foundations do. And it really, though it is a public charity, it still acts like a foundation, though largely an operating foundation, but still making grants. But the truth of the matter is, you look at the wide range of things that they're doing and the value that they add to what they're doing. I mean, I knew what the Center on the Press and Politics was all about before they took it over, when Times Mirror was running it. And Times Mirror ultimately gave it. Today, that is the preeminent survey of research operation on the range of issues, everything from global attitudes around the world towards the United States. Yesterday, there was a release of a new report on the values and associations of Jewish Americans, which nobody has ever done at the level of quality with which the Pew Research Center did it. And there was a luncheon in New York for a number of prominent figures in the Jewish community to come, and there was no, remarkably, no disagreement with though the last two such reports, which had been done internally by the Jewish community, by the National Jewish Population Survey and the Jewish Federations of North America, occasioned a great deal of disagreement about the methods we used to gather the data and everything else. So the value added across the range in these efforts has really been phenomenal, and the range is phenomenal too. It's everything from religion in American life to the Pew Center on the Oceans to a wide variety of things done through the Pew Research Center. So I have said to people think about foundation presidents who have achieved a great deal in having impact on society. I don't think anyone comes close to what the Pew Charitable Trust has done under Rebecca's leadership. So it's really an honor to have you here, my dear. And we all look forward to your adding to anything I've said. You cannot, as I said when we started, you cannot disagree with anything I just said.
I never disagree. I never disagree with Joel. Joel, thank you for that. So if we had hours and hours, we could talk about why I got subpoenaed in the recent NFL football case. I didn't know. So sometimes things you do 30 or 40 years ago come back to haunt you, so to speak.
Brain damage.
Huh?
That about brain damage.
So also, I tell people on my staff, because I meet with all the new employees, though we're adding a lot, and our numbers with the Pew Research Center now are over 900 employees. But the first thing I say is that I have been here longer than before most of you were born. And looking around this room, I've probably been at Pew before longer than at least half of you were born, 30 years. But talk about distinguished tenures, Joel. You have been here 42 years.
That's true.
So I have got to run to catch up. And this institution is distinguished in so many ways. The school has had such impact, not only on the students, but on national policy. And I'm not going to say anything else nice about you, but then these people are going to say that we planned this.
That's
all.
good. Go
okay, right. Let me talk briefly. We are a very different institution than the one I joined 30 years ago, a traditional grant maker, doing everything anonymously because our founders had directed us to do that. They were deeply religious people. They believed in the biblical teaching that to those who much is given, much is expected. And if it's a charitable act, you don't ask for recognition. Well, these seem like very old-fashioned concepts now, but the values were critically important to our founders. A story that I tell was in 1949 when J. Howard and J.N. were talking to their employees at Sun Oil in Marcus Hook, paying honor to the 131 men, their employees, who had died in the war, getting fuel to the fleet. They tell the story about how 3 of them that survived were adrift for 21 days. They were rescued and only to sign up to go out on a tanker again. And the reason I tell this story is that the values of this family are the one thing that haven't changed. A sense of humility, a sense of speaking truth to power, trying to right wrongs. That is the business that we've been in for many, many years. There's a wonderful story. Look magazine sent a telegraph. You don't have to think back, no sense. Sent a telegraph to J and Pew. I believe the year was 1947, 48. New president had been elected, and they said, we're asking the luminaries of the day to give the new president 2 pieces of advice. A very humble man, didn't cotton to the press at all, wouldn't answer, kept telegraphing. And so finally he answered. He said, tell the truth and trust the people. Of course, Look magazine came back and said, can't you say more? He said, I don't think I need to. And that's really the business that we have been in. So as much as we've changed, and I'm happy to talk about the evolution to becoming a public charity, the values that guide the institution, the family's influence. Over half of our board today are members of the Pew family, and of the half that aren't. I like to say half might as well be, because they've been with the family for a very, very long time. But we have reinvented the institution. And let me just say a little bit about how we go about our work, because it is diverse. We're not committed to any one area. We're not necessarily health or the environment. What we do is we pick issues where the facts are clear. Data has to drive everything we do. And then once we know that the facts are clear, we do an analysis of whether we can move the needle to make change on behalf of the public in a period of 3 years. We don't take on an issue where we don't have at least a 60-40 chance of winning. And winning for us can be getting a piece of legislation passed, changing policy, getting government to act in a different way, setting aside land, or creating parks in the sea, and I'll use a couple of examples. We have to have leverage, and we have to be able to know when to hold them and when to fold them. So if we are not making success, and that's not clearly identifiable in 3 years, we will close down a line of work. And that discipline has really served us well. So for 10 things that we might pick to work on, only one will make it through the assessment process. So there's a lot on our cutting room floor. I'm happy to talk about some of the paths that we haven't taken. So let me use a couple of examples that might be more helpful than talking about corrections reform. I was not a proponent of taking this on, but in 2007, clearly we looked at the data, and states were being crippled by the cost of building prisons. The numbers were staggering. And in building those prisons, they weren't getting a good return on investment for public safety. Recidivism was going through the roof. Crime was not going down. So the question was, could we get a small number of states to decide not to build prisons and to take low-level offenders and put them in have them pay their debt to society in other ways that did not involve incarceration? Well, first I thought we're going to get labeled the soft on crime crowd. Would this work? And I could go through what we've done, but now we have worked with 26 states. $18 billion has been saved in terms of prisons not built. We recently had the governor of South Dakota to come in and talk with our board about why they did it. And in Texas alone, our partners, there has been over $4 billion averted. And Texas was our first state, hardly what you think of as a soft on crime. We don't talk about soft on crime, we talk about smart on crime. Now we'll probably get out of this field in the next year because the momentum is there. And the technical assistance is available, and we won't need to stay the course. We're working on issues that seem like they should have been solved 30 years ago, putting fluoride in the water. 35% of this country does not have fluoride in the drinking water. It's one of the great public health advances. Why? It's usually political, and it's been actually much more difficult to solve than one would think. And pensions. This one is, some of this work is not for the faint of heart. We are now in 5 states and 3 cities around the country, brought in by the leadership to look at the problem of pensions. Kentucky, and I'll single them out because all our work it is critical that we have informed, thoughtful, fearless, committed leadership. In Kentucky, again, a great example. Governor of one party, head of the legislature of a different party, just fighting it out in the press, and the Chamber of Commerce trying to get some common ground. They closed the door. They asked for our technical assistance. And they have now put in pension reform that's going to save the state $10 billion over the next 20 years. And their pension program will be solvent. And they did this in a way based on data and based on facts. Now, there are a lot of unhappy people that they did this. But every locality and every state around the country is going to need to follow suit, because the number right now in unfunded pension liability in this country is $1.4 trillion and growing. It's obviously not sustainable. I'm going on too long. Okay, so I'll give a couple of examples from our environmental work. And sometimes leadership comes in from people that you might not always think of, and that's what makes it particularly interesting. I would go back to Texas. Our greatest advocates in Texas on corrections reform were Grover Norquist and Trent Lott, with a big assist from Newt Gingrich. They wrote op-eds for us. They were involved because, and I don't think going in we would have necessarily thought that would be our band of three, but they were forceful advocates because they saw the financial return and the return in terms of improved public safety. One of the ideas, and I can spend hours and you don't want to hear it, on the problems of our oceans. We don't see the problems because obviously it's not visible to us, but huge problems with overfishing. Over $35 billion a year in illegal fishing, which is really stealing from the poorest of the countries around the globe. But also the need to create parks in the sea. We do a lot of land-based work in Canada. Our goal is to set aside 1 billion acres, that's 6 times the size of Texas, that will be protected forever. And so far we're at about 350 million acres. Our partners there are the logging industry, mining, very strong public sector leadership, and we have work we're doing like that in Australia. I'll use this one example. Parks in the sea. We create parks on land. Could we create the first generation, 15 very large marine protected areas? You couldn't take fish, you can't take anything out but a picture. And there are a lot of reasons ecologically that we need to do this. Sanctuaries for sharks and many other reasons. So we got our first park in the sea on the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, thanks to George Bush. So we thought, okay, this is great. We want to get the Mariana Trench. And these are big, big pieces. I have some numbers in here. One's the size of Oregon, another twice the size of New Mexico. So I'll tell a story. He was getting a lot of heat from his vice president, which was on the press, and from the Department of Defense to not do the park in the Marianas Trench. So I just happenstance ended up rededicating the Star Spangled Banner, and I was there with one of our donors, and we knew this, and we both, so Roger Sand, who you might know, Roger said to me, you need to go and talk to him. I was like, that's not going to happen. Roger, so we debated, so we said, we'll go together. So he said, Mr. President, we know that you're basically getting a lot of heat from people not to designate this. And by the way, the President of the United States and other heads of state can do this through something called the Monuments Act. And I'll never forget this. He looked at us and he said, I'm going to do what's right. And I'm going to do what I think is right before I leave office. That's fine. Thank you, sir, for listening. 4 days before he left office, he had a signing ceremony. He created the second of our parks. He did it, I'll never forget, with all the military sitting in the front row, knowing that they had been his adversaries, saying, General so-and-so and Admiral so-and-so, I want to thank you. I want to thank you so-and-so for your support. I thought this was amazing. And he set aside more of the surface of the globe and protected area than any person ever. So, would we have thought going in that President George W. Bush would be the environmentalist that would create a blue legacy? I don't think we would have thought that. Did he become a great ally, and could we have obviously done it without him? The answer is no. We are now looking at reserves in Easter Island, Pitcairn. We've gotten another one in the Kermadec. Ultimately, we will look at setting aside about 40% of the world's oceans in these parks. We have donor partners. I'm getting to what you really want me to talk about. We have donor partners in this. So we sold shares. We basically said we want 10 donors to each join us and to each pledge equal amount of money. And those 10 donors, the vast majority of them are from outside of the U.S. They meet virtually and in person once a year. We set strategy and we operate the program for them. We obviously have one share ourselves. Let me a word on the public charity and then we'll stop because I think that people have more fun asking questions. We did make the conversion in 2003. We did it because we could, so it tells the story. It's changed everything for us. First of all, private foundations, you probably know, they outsource their work. What do I mean by that? They make grants. As a public charity, and Duke's a public charity, every organization's a public charity, they do the work themselves. So that's why our staff went over that period of time from 100 to 900. Secondly, you raise money. As a public charity, you're required to do that, to keep your public charity status. And today, on average, we have about 100 to 125 donors. And the reason that's really been eye-opening for us is some of us will know at private foundations you never have another bad idea, and everybody tells you how wonderful you are. Well, you know what? When you're out raising money, that doesn't work quite that way. And so we now know that we have people voting with their resources, and basically it's a very good barometer and a great way to evaluate how we're doing, or one way to evaluate. And third, public charities can lobby. And by law, private foundations can't, except in their own self-defense. So we have a very active government relations program. We lobby on about 40 different projects at state, federal, and international level. We do it when we feel that the facts are clear and that getting legislation changed is critical. Just this weekend we had a win on compounding pharmacies, food safety legislation, and again, you don't need to run through a whole litany of the kinds of things that we lobby on. So it's transformed the organization. At the board, they have life terms. So over half the board I have, I inherited in '83 because a lot of what I hear is, oh my gosh, there must have just been a whole new group of people that showed up, or they got snookered or whatever. Not true. Very diligent, very committed board, feeling strongly that they have a stewardship responsibility. And reminding us from time to time as people start to talk about Pew as a brand, and it's not a brand, it's their name, and they take that very seriously. So Joe, let me stop, and let's have a conversation with a lot more fun.
Say, you mentioned donor partners. It would be interesting for you all to know that foundations do not typically recruit money from others. They spend the money that they got, unless they're community foundations. They spend the money that they got on the basis of how much income is earned by their endowments. But Rebecca decided that she was going to try to see if she could get a group of people to give Pew Charitable Trust money to spend on, basically piggyback on their expertise to spend in the areas in which they were working. I thought that it would be very difficult to do. Nobody had ever succeeded in doing it, as far as I know. There were even 2 surveys that were done to see foundations to see if they would be willing to try to do something like that, and they came back negative. But she proceeded to do it, and now has a donor relations group of how many people?
Probably 25.
25 people specializing in fundraising. That's what they do, unlike other foundations that don't have anybody like that. And the last time we talked, the figure that was being given away by external donors was somewhere in the neighborhood of $500 or $600 million. Is that right, or is it more than that now?
Well, we're running about 70 million a year and growing, not counting people that put large sums of money there, but restricted for a period of time. So, they come to us because they're interested in it. They're not giving us money to keep the lights on, pay the salaries.
It's passed through. I mean, to a
It's passed
project specifically? No.
To fund our work.
To do what you want.
So a good example would be a donor in Texas on illegal fishing. We've got a project that we want to launch with Interpol, and it's really cool because with technology, we can catch the bad guys. You could transponders on their boats, any boat over 70 feet, and then no matter where they go in the world, satellite can find them. And once they know that they are in waters they shouldn't be, they then, through a handheld device, can tell the people at the port, do not let this vessel come in, and do not give them fuel, and don't let them unload their cargo. It's caught illegally. It closes down, a $28 billion illegal business like that. And Interpol decided they wanted to be our partner, but we need some money to capitalize this. And we had a donor in Texas, and she's great. And she said, I really like getting bad guys. And oh, by the way, I got a thing for guys in uniform. That's kind of how she talks. And she wrote the check to fund this entire effort. So, but we're running it, and we're partnering with Interpol, and we're setting up the technology and running the satellites and all this stuff that has to be done. But she's back.
So that's an amazing feat itself, because foundations don't give money to other foundations. Wealthy people tend not to do that. They have their own foundations with their donor advised funds. So it's really quite an achievement.
Well, but it's changing. You kind of say that, but I might say a word about new donors, because I've been in this business a long time. And the way you raised money some years ago is you would go to donors, and they would be particularly committed to a community or to a set of institutions, where they would feel they had a civic responsibility. And people would approach them to say that, you should do this. This is what wealthy people do. They give back to their community, and they support the institutions in the community. Those days are over. New donors basically are interested in return on investment. They are interested in big ideas. They feel no real connection, per se, to community or institution. Most of them have been raised with 4 homes and, living virtually, and their businesses may have changed locations 3 times. So, other than universities where they have deep loyalty, this is a whole different way that nonprofits have to think about working with donors. So they want to solve problems. They want to fix things. They want to invest in big ideas. The notion that we need you to support us because we need payroll, we need this, that. It is an unsellable proposition, particularly to sophisticated large donors. And that's been very disruptive to the nonprofit sector.
Okay.
Sorry.
I'm the original hero worshiper of Rebecca Ryan, and I also
This is a
worship
Southern thing you should know. You can always roll over their eyes.
That's a preamble. That's how they
when I was doing whatever I was doing at the time, I did a project for her early on as well, in this case on religion, about which I knew not quite as little as you do about the other, not a hell of a lot. But in this case, how it was being handled in the press and elsewhere, mainly the press. But let me just say emphatically, as a guy who was a pass-through guy himself in the world of philanthropy, I've never known anybody in this field with as much guts, as willing to take a chance and, having been hit around the head and shoulders, keep on going, as shitty. I've never known people as willing to have put good ideas out, and when they didn't work, cut them and get on with it. It is a stunning thing in this field. And I promise you, ladies and gentlemen, she does not have an adoring press on a lot of these.
You didn't see that latest film on me, did you? That was really
No,
good.
and we put a little money into it. We put a little money into a couple of projects that you did, which made an awful lot of people very, very mad. And I didn't live there, so it didn't hurt me. It certainly did. No, I mean stunning, and not as quick, because I've been a beneficiary as well with organizations that I was with of willingness to take some chances, and I was glad about it as well.
Well, you're kind of say, but you need support. I mean, you need your board with you. You need people around you, and you need people to help you make the kind of decisions, to hold them and fold them. I was laughing about this film. So everybody, we got media people that worry about reputation and brand and all that. And it's always been that our environment director was going to get us in trouble. Oh, Josh, that was just the whole deal. He was going to go off and do something, wild and crazy or make somebody really mad. So wouldn't you know, the person that really did it, and for 12 years, was me. And it was an arts project. I mean, who thought it was the relocation of the Barnes collection in Philadelphia? 12 years. Films made, I mean, and it was the right thing. I mean, we could spend a lot of time
The
on
art
it.
of the steal.
Yeah, the art of the steal. And sometimes you go into things and you find yourself in the thick of it. But it is about, and that's why I go back to the values of the founders. It's about having that compass and really knowing that it's worth the ride, because, as I said, some of it's not for sissies. But
I got to add one thing, because she's so good making everything sound so logical and
Simple,
smoothly working
simple,
and simple.
simple.
I appreciate everything you said about your board. Your board was not automatically inclined to a lot of the things that we have managed to do. Some of us have bad tempers and can't bring boards along. Others somehow move with quite adamantine material and move it quite nicely. And I just want you to know that. These aren't all on some issues. I'm sorry, I started to say sweethearts. You have made them all sweethearts, or they have listened to you quite responsibly.
Well, it's about trust too, sorry.
Yeah.
I think we,
Joel, you were responsible.
Building on the last question, how, the structure of how you do it, you have the 9 funds, which were the original Pew Trust, some sort of seven, which is your home money, and then you borrow, and then you get gifts from others. How do you separate those two, or do you not? Do you have sort of a nub that's you, that you control, and then these other things? How do you keep those separate, and how do you think about them?
we are the beneficiary, so we get like a 5.25% flow from those funds, and they're invested in the market and they have their ups and
But
downs.
those you control, whereas if I give you a bunch of money, I'm saying, Rebecca, what's going to happen tomorrow with this?
No, but we have a contract with you. In other words, you say, I want to work with you to get 2 more marine protected areas. And I'm investing, and we tell you this is what it's going to cost, and you have a budget, and this is the time frame, and you know exactly what you bought into, and you know the risk you're taking, and you know the ultimate reward. And then you're informed along the way. So there's no ambiguity about what you invested in, what your expectations are. And I think one of the things in this business is knowing when to say no. We were very new at this, and was invited to New York, a North Carolina guy, a hedge fund guy who made a lot of money, and he wanted to get a piece of policy change. And it wasn't anything, awful or wrong. Listened to him, he looked at me, and he said, I got $50 million to do this. But you need to score $50 million, that's a whole lot of money. I mean, I was like, so I said, I got to go home. We got to do our homework. We got to do our due diligence, because I do not want to fail, because that is bad for business, because it's a small group that are, and you're going to talk, and I can't guarantee success, but I need to know you're going to have a 60-40 or better. Back I go into his office, niceties, because he's niceties, and I say, you can't win. This is not winnable. And he looks at me and he says, $100 million. It's like a completely foreign concept for you, but it is not about money. It wouldn't matter if it was $500 million. The facts aren't clear, the politics are all wrong. Through the whole list. And he's now an investor in a tiny way by that comparison to that. But I think it is the rigor of the process. But I'm off your point. People, our investors know exactly what they're investing in. They understand the risk, and they understand the potential return.
So I'm really pushing you towards what the core shop is. What is this Pew, these Pew Charitable Foundations? What are they? And then how do you define yourself?
Well, they are.
Is there a distinction between that and the jobs you do?
No, they are. That there's 700 people around the
So
globe.
it's
People. That's all. I mean, look, we're in the idea and doing business, so all other assets don't matter. And we're only as good as the people we recruit. And then the Pew Research Center, which Joel mentioned, we created as a corporate subsidiary, just to have a little space between us, because we do tap dogs in the fight, and them, take no positions. And they're 5 blocks away in Washington. So if I'm answering your question right, so the flow of funds
You're saying they're not distinguishable. It's one.
They're not distinguishable at all. Once we have a contract to complete a piece of work for a donor.
Ginger.
Yes. Hi, I'm Ginger Saul, and I'm connected to a growing family foundation. So I'm particularly interested in the rewind back to when you had this conservative, wanting to be anonymous board, and what were some of the experiences that you gave them that made them want to take the path that they did?
Well, I do think, and I've talked to a lot of people that are working with family foundations, both sides, staff, I do think the fact we kind of grew up together and developed a trusting relationship had a lot to speak for it. I can't imagine somebody parachuting into a brand new organization and trying to turn it on its head. And in fact, there are a lot of examples of that, and generally the people don't survive very well because it's too much, too fast. And so, I can make this sound like it was all quick, but it was incremental, but the board fundamentally wanted, so I asked them a question. This is probably the best answer. We were on this retreat, and I was going on and on as I can do, and it was after lunch, and they were like, is she ever going to quit talking? I said, okay, cut to the chase. 5 years from now, you're on an airplane, and two people are talking about the Pew Trust. What are they saying that makes you pump with pride or slouch with shame? And hopefully, I'll be able to do more of the former. And they said to a person, we want this money to make a difference. We don't want to fund studies that sit on shelves. We want to bring together a bunch of like-minded people that are going to talk. They already know what they're going to say before they get there. We want to solve problems. I was like, whoa, well, that is a very different organization than we have today. We're going to have to be highly focused. We're going to have to be like heat-seeking. We're going to missile. We're going to have to be disciplined. And this was long before we became a public charity. So we got a lot more tools in our toolkit when we made the conversion, but we were doing this kind of work way before that. And so that put a discipline in the board. We used to have conversations, I want more money for arts. Well, I think education is more important. Well, I think health. Those are completely unfruitful and unwinnable because they're all important. And so now, there are none of those conversations. What's got the highest ROI? How are we doing? And all this work is independently evaluated. And so a strategy paper goes in and says, look, for X million dollars over the following 5 years, these are problems we can solve. And, X acres saved, X amount more fluoridation, food safety legislation passed, Now look, you can't guarantee it, and everybody understands their risk, and we do have failures. I'm just not sitting here telling you about all of them, but you learn from them. Campaign finance reform was a huge failure for us, and it was a failure because we won only to be defeated. We worked in it for 9 years. We funded the case to the Supreme Court. We collected the data, became Feingold. We won only to have it 3 years later overturned. So, sometimes we often ask, would you go back? And the answer is no, because it's not winnable and stickable again, I don't think.
Yes. Yeah.
Where do your ideas come from?
That is a great question. First of all, from the staff, largely, I used to get all my ideas from David Broder, the columnist at the Post. He was the one, I told him this, and he would never, now he's not with us anymore, but he would never, ever, ever let me say that to him. But he was the first person that tipped me off to the fact that the action in this country was going to be happening at the states, not in Washington. Even back then, he knew the federal government was going to get all mired up on themselves. And that really, not just the laboratories of innovation, but for better or worse, there's going to be some really amazing stuff going on in the states. And where the politicians are close to their constituents, where they have to balance their budgets, and where there's a discipline, you were going to be able to get traction. And that totally changed our policy work and what we did. So, I keep saying to the staff and everybody that I meet with, there are no bad ideas. And everybody should have 90, and out of the 90, there are 2 good ones. It's just, or two actionable ones, it's a better way to put it. So, our cutting room floor is littered with ideas. And I would say I have not had one of my own make it through the gauntlet for the last 8 months. Because we all apply the same discipline to internally generated ideas and external.
Tony.
You said you use a 3-year window for gauging your 60-40 odds. That sounds a lot shorter than prevails in the industry. Do you feel like it's an especially tight or confining period of time?
I need to correct it, not for the win, but in 3 years you have to have shown some forward movement and success. The win is usually in 5, it can be as long as 10-year increments, depending on what the goal is. But if you are at year 3 and everything is broken the wrong way, and then you probably have to question whether the opportunity cost to stay the course to 5 years is too high, because it's money. But I don't, 3-year, thanks for the correction, it's not a 3-year win. So for the parks and the sea, 15 large marine protected areas. From the get-go, that was a 10-year goal. But if we were at year 5 and didn't have any, this would not be good. I mean, this would be, so there's a whole long, and all of these are evaluated over that period. That's Joel started, got us started an evaluation to say, okay, what kind of mid-course changes? Is it still looking as good as 60-40 or 70-30? Has it gone up? Or did things just really not break right? So,
do you often get to year 3 and feel like it's not the things aren't working, but the direction of things is not yet clear? It just seems to me that 3 years is an awfully short running time. There must be some ambiguities at that point.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's rare that we close something down at 3 years because it is premature. But we have. The other thing is getting out with success, and this is the hardest part for the board. So we decided to get into pre-K education like 12 years ago. Huge return on investment. And the change idea was if we can get 12 states to pass legislation for universal access for 3- and 4-year-olds to quality pre-K, we can get out because the rest of the states will follow. And even with the recession, we got there. And I mean, our board was like, you can't leave now. And look, and the answer was yes, because there's a critical enough mass, there's enough data, and there's enough infrastructure in the field. We need to get out and move our resources to something else. So the getting out can also be because of a win. And that in some ways is harder than a loss. But it's rare that you know enough at 3 years, but you need to ask the questions at 3 years. And then by 5 years, you really should know whether you're making progress.
You had your hand up first. Yes.
About the 60-40 idea that you put out there. And first of all, is it truly a quantifiable analysis that you're doing to make this 60-40 judgment, or is that more shoot from the hip kind of notion? And that seems to be really highly motivated on a success model for maximizing return on investment in a way, as opposed to making value judgments on intrinsic value of some project, where there's great projects that, a 40% chance of success doesn't mean it's not going to succeed.
Right. But you have to put some discipline around your process. And our discipline may be wrong, and it's certainly wrong for other donors. But without that, then the ability to make decisions becomes largely arbitrary and very subjective. And that's where we were as an institution. So we were into more money for ballet or versus whatever, and these projects and these are good institutions and whatever, all true. But we really didn't have a way to kind of discipline our decision making. You're right, it's subjective, but an analysis would be on food safety legislation. So when we started this, it took us 2.5 years longer than it should have. We're ready. But the question was, are the facts clear? We had not had change in food safety legislation since the 50s. The FDA doesn't have recall. If you are poisoning people with peanut butter, they can't tell you to stop making it. All they can do is say, please, it would be nice if you would stop making it. It's crazy. None of the food coming in from overseas is being inspected, and we have to go on and on. And this is just crazy. I mean, people believe that their food is safe. So we turned to say, okay, who would our logical allies be? Once the grocery manufacturers signed on, we said, okay, this is good. It's not going to be a do-gooder nonprofit against corporate America. This is because they wanted it, because they want people to buy spinach and feel it's okay. We looked at the politics. We looked at the issues with particularly the states that represent agriculture. But what we didn't bargain for is after we got the legislation passed, that it would get stuck in the White House for 3 years, not signed because of politics. So, is it a win? Yes, but did the ultimate, So it is a subjective, it's not an analytical 60-40, but it's looking at what are the hurdles, what's the opposition, what's the data, what's the likelihood. I mean, it's literally, if it's legislative, it's literally going congressman by congressman and figuring out how he or she will vote and what you need in committees and the whole process to see what it takes.
Which White House?
This one.
I thought that was pertinent for you.
No, no, absolutely.
You indicated that you want to be able to identify something trending toward a positive direction in that 3-year window, but you have the patience to wait that up to 10 years to see the return on investment and so forth. I'm really wondering, the private sector does not seem to have that kind of patience. And there's an awful lot of talk now about social impact bonds and social investing and so forth, where the returns are, are realized over long terms in many cases, particularly corrections, where you're able to measure whether or not it's really going the way you want it to go, and for people to begin to reap those returns on their investments. What do you think is the future for this?
Well, I think we have to incent corporations where it matters, which is where regulation is going to be changed. It's going to help them get products to market quicker. I mean, the fact it takes them forever to get new medical devices or whatever, we have to make them our ally in doing this. We just got legislation passed on barcodes on medical devices. I mean, there's a barcode on everything, and yet when they put a heart part in you or a hip, there's no way to trace it. And so they were our biggest allies, the medical device community. So I think, but if you are doing right now, we're doing a lot of work on predatory lending. And we got the Credit Card Act passed with partners, and just found out that the consumers in this country, since the Credit Card Act was passed 3-4 years ago, have saved $27 billion. Now that's a real return. We started that project. Not going on too much.
No.
We started that project. We had this idea that our model change was that we were going to create a clean card. We were going to go to places like Duke and other places and say, you should stop pushing those crummy cards or affinity cards because they have hidden fees. They have all kinds of bad things in them. So you want to only push a clean card. Our theory was we could then make the market move to clean cards. Well, you know what? We had our head handed to us. I mean, we were wildly unsuccessful. So we stopped the whole thing, less than 3 years, and we moved to a legislative model. Basically naming names and showing what credit card companies were doing. That was predatory. And we got the act passed. Only now there's some new loopholes opening up. So but we did it in a way that we recognized that lenders, in this case credit card issuers, needed to make a profit and they needed to be rewarded for risk. And yet they had to sort of stop some of these, opaque policies they had in place. So I'm not really, I think though, we are friends of industry. We want them as our partners because that's how we're going to win, but we have to walk in their shoes. But if they're really doing things like some of this payday lending, which is really, or check sequencing that your banks do. I mean, there are a lot of practices in the finance. So you assume that you put your money in the bank, and then you write checks, and then all of this happens in the order in which you do it. No. What they do is they wait, and they take the highest, they hold your deposit, which they can do, and then they take your highest check, the one that cost them, and they process that one first so they can push you into overdraft. And you probably keep enough balance that doesn't happen to you too much, and it goes on with all the major banks. And they make a lot of billions and billions in overdraft. So we've been saying and publishing and advocating and praising. We now have 12 banks that have stopped it. And we stand up and put ads in papers and say they're really good guys. So I'm off your question a bit, but I think you can use carrots and sticks with the private sector, and they work.
They're the ones that are now charging me $3 to use an ATM machine, my own money.
At least you can see that.
Yeah, I know,
It's-
but I had to
it's-
read the
it's what
fine
you
print.
pay.
Bank of America is going to December, they had to hand it to them once, they're going back to the well. $3 for my money through a machine.
So you should go to Wells Fargo, which doesn't do that.
Believe me, I'm going
Yes,
Oh, sorry, what?
you're the boss.
I didn't see anybody. Who else had their hand up? So,
Okay.
okay.
You have told us about a variety of very interesting projects that are massive changes to the world we live in. But what would you say is the chance of small foundations, small charities that don't have lots of funding to make real changes in the world that impact society and are sticky, as you said before?
See, I don't really think it's about the size of the money. I think it's about bold leadership, creative ideas, and being laser focused on results. And I think too much money, I say this, is a distraction. And I think it sometimes takes a funder off their game. So some of the best work that we've done has not been in large scale. It's been, and I should say, a big factor in all this is luck. I mean, I make it sound so analytical. You know, things break your way. You know, you get lucky. You seize an opportunity when it presents itself. But I would be wrong to leave you with the impression that we're fortunate because we have resources and we have these other donors that we can work on issues that are international in scope. And that makes it, that's an expensive way to go about your work. It costs a lot more money doing work internationally than it does domestically. But, you know, getting New Mexico, I'll use an example, getting New Mexico to implement home visiting programs, nurse-family partnerships for expectant mothers, it has a huge return on investment. It's known, the data is very good. It did not take a lot of money. We worked with a local donor in New Mexico, and the legislature looked at it and said, this is a good return on investment for us. Kids are born healthier. There's a lot of data to show that they are better prepared for school. The results of this last for 15 years after a very modest investment. So, it's about the leadership, the people, the good ideas, and as one of my board members used to say, I never knew what he meant. He said, not falling in love with love. And I was like, what is he saying? What he was basically saying is you get so caught up in your ideas and you think that they're so wonderful that you just can't apply that kind of discipline. We all get that way, and my staff does too. So having people help you apply that discipline.
Clearly you're doing an extraordinary amount of research on everything that you do. I don't know if you have data or 100% around, but how do you quantify how much time you're spent researching ideas that don't actually come to fruition versus actually executing on the ones that do? Is that 50-50?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I do know that more than half never see the light of day. But then there is this sort of, it's the discipline. So you'll get somebody has an idea and they just can't let it go. And when that didn't work, well, we're going to try another and another and another. It's like, give it up, I mean, and I really, I'll use a good example. I mean, so how many, do not call, everybody signs up for do not call. So these people, awful people aren't calling you at dinner time. So we said, okay, let's have a do not mail campaign, right? Get all that junk. It's bad for the environment. It's filling up landfills. Nobody wants it. You can go on and on. Well, I couldn't let them spend a year on this. We'd ended up in the Supreme Court on free speech. We'd undone every nonprofit in the country that uses this direct mail. We would have crippled further the U.S. Postal Service. I mean, it was just, it was not winnable. It's not undoable, but they couldn't, it was like, well, I can't, really. And I'm like, so I can't quantify, certainly we should be more efficient in our due diligence to say, no, we do, we probably hang on a little bit too long, but it's a people's time.
Nancy?
So we keep on going around, and I want to come back to the idea generation question because I keep on hearing different pieces, and we're all so incredibly, honored that the Pew has taken this on and thankful for the work that you're doing. And so the ideas that come, they come from your staff. It could be an organic process. It could be that you're looking at the political landscape and something is just glaring and you feel like you need to do some research to see if you can do something to advance a cause. You've mentioned that you had one donor come to you to request that you take on something in particular. Are there other ways that you are, pulling in the ideas that you end up working on? What comes to mind is like the Pioneer Program with Robert Wood Johnson, where they're willing to take all kinds of whatever people want to throw at them in a small way to say, is this something that we could take and run with? I just want to pull a little bit more, try to take a little bit more out of it.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a, Skunk Works group internally. We have, and, hopefully, the great fear I have is that people get so they can't hear. We're not open and we're not outward looking. I mean, the idea for our work on the internet and Hispanics came in one conference I sat in, and somebody said, and it's a long time ago, do you know in the U.S. that there are going to be more Hispanics than African Americans in like 5 years? And the truth is there always already was. And I was like, really? Wow, who knew? Well, who's studying that? I mean, that's a tectonic shift. I was just with some really smart people, and they said, the middle class, Alan talked about this, the middle class around the world is growing like topsy. That's really exciting. People moving out of poverty, but it's going to totally destabilize world economies, governments. I mean, this is why we're having the uprisings as people get, more stability financially. What's going on in Europe and everywhere. This is like going to change the face of the globe. I was like, whoa, and there's data to back that up. And you think, wow, somebody needs to be tracking that. Yeah. I remember the first time I heard about the internet was like out, but it's like, people are going to be worshiping on it. I was like, get real. I mean, they're going to be buying things on it. It's going to really. Well, so who's watching that? We started the internet. So I mean, ideas, but you got to have people that can.
We started the internet too, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, me and I was on board, right? No, I was like, somebody's got to try. So we started the internet project at the Pew Research Center. So, but I do worry. I think really kind of underneath your question, if you get people to think that they generate all the ideas and they can't listen and they can't go, that's really cool, or let's kick the tires and get some data on that, you really, it won't take long for your pipeline to dry up and, you start talking to yourself. The other thing is, we have a lot of turnover. And we bring in a lot of diversity into the organization, diversity of all types, and particularly political diversity. I want people to think about problems from very different ideologies of politics. And in nonprofits, it's hard to do. And hard to make people feel, because they're generally a little more democratic. Not here, Duke, I know, but, more, and to let people feel comfortable in talking about issues from a very different political or ideological platform.
Do you encourage turnover? When they come in, you say, I hope you don't think you're going to make a 20-year career out of this.
Everybody's that are working on all these projects are on term contracts, and those are evaluated. So we're very performant. So when it comes time for evaluation and we're not measuring up, they're gone. They know that. And budgets are set that way, and compensation's set that way. So nobody's there. Operating staff is different. People in finance and that kind of thing. But in the program side, they get it.
Rebecca, looked at through the framework of the shutdown in Washington at this point, how do you view the gathering that you had some years ago of members of Congress?
My board reminded me of this. So I talk about failure, and these are failures we were reminded of. So we had this thing that we were going to take away, and we did it 3 times. We took away members of Congress to see if they could actually talk civilly to each other. We took first in Hershey, thought that'd sweeten them up, and and then maybe they rebelled because it wasn't nice enough, and then we took them to like the Homestead, and literally we got a lot that would go. And so every time I bring something like this, my board says, Ann, would you like to talk about an evaluation of that project? And, but let me just tell you, so you don't understand that all is lost. We've been doing this now for 6 years, and we don't talk about it. but we run a safe house for the Senate Chiefs of Staff. These are very important people. And once a month, they get together for either breakfast or dinner. And then, once every 2 years, we take them away, and we were taking them away this week to Philadelphia. And we had to cancel it because of the shutdown, because they can't leave. But what we do, they get together. We get, at any gathering, we will get between 60, we had 80 signed up to go to Philadelphia. And they talk about their craft. They talk about how to run their offices. They talk about pragmatic things. But they talk about their lives. And they talk about how hard it is. And they talk about, and they like one another. And they talk about the toll that the vitriol is having on them and their families. I mean, it's really extraordinary. And they you know, we try to like say, okay, well, we'll take a couple months off. No, they really, really value this. So, you know, it's done quietly. We don't talk about it. We don't have to press it. But obviously, you know, this is just, and it's for them. And now we've been approached, you know, by some other, members in Congress who are governors want to sort of get together because governors have a different feeling about the whole fiscal federalism. A lot of what's happening in Washington is going to have a huge impact, mostly negative on states. It already is. So they came to us and said, could you kind of create a safe house for us? I think there are 14 of them, the former governors.
Members in the House.
Yeah, it's a Senate, mainly. Yeah. And, you know, can we get together? And, you know, and it's completely bipartisan. So, anyway, but Hershey was a utter failure. Thanks for reminding me.
Well, I thought you had something constructive to say about how we can deal with the shutdown.
Yeah, right. Well, no.
Yes.
I was wondering,
Right. Give our regards to Tom Landis.
I will.
Yes, please
It
do.
ought to be a great occasion.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was wondering, given your length of time in this, if you could comment on the trend that you've seen in changing how you measure in a better way in evaluation of change on what's happened over the period of time that you've run at this group, and what you see as future trends in terms of getting better and better at measuring real change.
So is it the change in the sector or change in terms of?
The results of your projects.
Well, for us, evaluation is pretty easy, but attribution is not.
Yeah.
So for us, because our goals are so unequivocal, we will get this piece of legislation passed. We will create these 10 parks. We will get, you know, and it either happens or it doesn't. So for us, whether we achieved, it's highly measurable. And there's no ambiguity when we started as to what the end game was. So that part is easy. What is really hard to do is to say, but for us. Because there are a lot of things that are going on out there. You know, we're not working in a vacuum. And secondly, what could we have done better, which we try to learn from these. Where could we have done it more efficiently? Why did it take us as long as it did? And what was the collateral damage and reputational or not, or burnishment of our reputation? So those are kind of variables that are more subjective, but we need to know them, because then the next time we need to build those in. So those are very hard, and we hire evaluators external to us. It's run independent from the program, reports to me and the board. And, you know, we tell people they're being brought in. We want the unvarnished story. We get a lot of pressure over the years to publish these and make them available. We thought about it, but it really changes what you get. And people know that it's going to be conveyed, that they pull their punches. And I get that. So we have not sort of, I mean, we use these, and we use them as case studies. We use them for teaching. We have a Pew University, and these become our case material for teaching about what we got wrong and what we got right and where we were just lucky.
Does that include the impact, the original impact of what you hope would happen if
sure.
you did this?
Oh, sure.
Not just that you got the bill passed or you got the parks created, or
What was the intent? How much money was invested? What was promised? And what was the end result? And then what was the strategy? What was the sort of strategy of change? And was it efficient? And if it failed, was there anything we could have done?
Thank you.
So I'm curious to know what.
Stand up a little bit so we can hear you better.
I'm curious to know what keeps you up at night and what gives you is your biggest challenges, both personally and with your organization going forward?
Well, I sleep pretty well. I mean, to say what might be obvious, managing really talented personnel is the hardest thing. We're blessed. We're a magnet for talent. But we're also running a very complex, $400 million a year operation. My CFO came to me one day when we chose public charity. He says, "What is it that you don't understand about complexity?" Because I was like, obviously not putting enough money in his department. He said, "We've gone from one bank account in one town. We're now operating in 17 currencies with 32 bank accounts." I mean, it's a complicated operation now that we do the work ourselves. So you worry about things that would go wrong, things that would have huge reputational impact, things that would have a fiduciary or financial impact. Obviously, I worry about the board being aware and informed, and when we're taking risks, they're in the boat with me rather than up on the cliff waving as we're going. You never want people up there waving and seeing if you crash. And how to manage talent, how to recruit talent, and a particular challenge for us is, or for me, I should say, is recruiting and managing millennials who have a very different expectation of, employee-employer relations, corporate culture. It's just different. I'm not value judging whether it's, better or worse. And so it's the human aspect of, are we getting it right? And how do you, and if you ask the board that question, they would have a very specific answer. How are you inculcating into each of these people you bring into this institution the values of this institution? And if people can't accept the values that we have here, then they shouldn't be on this bus. I feel very strongly about that, and the people understand. And it was really funny. This guy came up, an older employee, new, and he said, I think it's been 20 years since somebody gave me the values lecture. And but it is part of the culture and how we expect people not just to conduct themselves, but what we expect in terms of them as representatives of this family legacy.
Speaking of value transmission, how are you handling succession planning? I mean, when I see what you're doing and how well you're doing it, I want you to try to clone a bunch of people to follow in your footsteps, either to Pew or elsewhere. So the question is, how do you go about doing that? Are you consciously making these steps to try to mentor junior people and everything?
Well, I have to say, when you're 100 people and you're kind of running to stay head above water, we didn't pay much attention to it. But the board chair for the last 6 years ran a major corporation, and he's a really smart guy. Bob Campbell, he was the CEO and president of Sun Oil. He served on a bunch of corporate boards. And he sort of took me to the woodshed on this topic. And he said, this is really not acceptable. Succession planning is one of the most important things that an institution has to do, and you need to get very purposeful about it. And so we have, and everything from identifying next tier talent. I mean, we have two parts of succession. We have a plan for the bus, we call it. The bus euphemism is somebody who's just not there the next day. So for every position, senior position in the organization, there is the person that would succeed in an emergency. And then secondly, we are looking at the next tier of staff, and we are giving them more face time with the board. We're giving them management training. We're doing a lot of things to try and bring along the next tier, because particularly in an organization that's sort of family-centered, but I serve on a couple of corporate boards, and they are really good about succession planning. So
some of them are.
Yeah, well, I'm fortunate to be at least on one that is. Spend a lot of time on this, and it is because succession and making sure that the institution is not jolted. It needs to be changed, but it does need to be changed in succession. So I give it an F until like the last 3 years, but now we're trying to get.
So you get a B now.
Well, I don't know. No, it's working up to a C.
Damon?
So I'm really curious to know about the relationship between, I know you guys do still a little bit of grant making, and then your program staff, and whether or not there's turf and tension there. And I run a small foundation that's starting to think about this, and one of the things we hear when we start thinking about doing a program internally is from all of our grantees saying, well, wait a second.
Oh, they hate it.
Yeah. So how do you deal with that? How do you manage that?
Well, look, you're not. they're going to hate it, and they're going to say nasty things about you and such. Because look, you would do the same if you were on the other side. What organizations want is they want resources to carry out their work. And if you're a source of resources for them, and that ceases to be, there is no way to navigate through that in any positive way. It's just, it is. And so what I think you have to decide is, how can your resources be used most efficiently for the best return? It could be in an outsourced model. It could be that the grant-making model is exactly what you want, as long as you can have organizations focused on the agenda that you're trying to accomplish. So I'm not advocating that an in-sourced model like we've done is necessarily the best. It's been the best for us. It's worked out very well, but I don't necessarily advocate it. But it's really hard. We had a lot of trouble getting nonprofits to coalesce around a campaign. They want to divide and conquer. They want their piece of the pie, and they want to go off and do their thing. In Philadelphia, we've got way too many nonprofits. I mean, way too many, and particularly in the arts. We tried to get the history museums to come together and merge. They'd rather die than join. I mean, right? I mean, and so it's the survival. And one of the other concepts is we found, particularly in Philadelphia, where we do a lot of grant making, more traditional work, we had become part of the problem in disturbing the market. In the for-profit world, if you don't have enough resources and you're undercapitalized and whatever, you're going to go out of business, or you're going to be forced to merge. What happens in the nonprofit sector is donors come along and say, well, you're really struggling, and so we're going to give a bit of money to a lot of institutions. It causes proliferation, and they get disincented from merging this type of thing. We've made this mistake for years, so I don't think there's any way to make that leap if that's what you decided to do and have anybody happy about it. You just have to think it's right.
But sometimes it's the right thing to do.
It could be, depending on your strategy and such, but it will not be popular. And then you can say that Joel told you to do it, and you really
I'm
didn't.
blaming you. I was at this FIRG lecture, and it's
yeah, that's right. But look, if I were walking in their shoes, I would feel exactly the same way. So I understand.
Yes.
Rebecca, you talked earlier about how you've seen kind of the change in fundraising for some of these donors and the way that you're fundraising now. You've also talked a little bit about some of these maybe sexy projects, like catching illegal fishermen and having money to coordinator. And there's also some projects that maybe aren't sexy but have a really good ROI. How do you balance those two benefits when you're talking to donors and encourage them to get on board with one or the other?
Well, I think it would be very sexy. Let's talk about, so we do a lot of work for the disadvantaged in Philadelphia, and there's some organizations, they're doing it particularly effectively. They may have decided to get rid of a third of what they were doing and redeploy those resources to get more depth instead of breadth. Make some hard decisions that way, reinvent themselves. That's pretty sexy. I mean, because they are doing the kind of strategic planning and implementation to better serve their constituents. So I think for an organization to say, look, we're just doing it right. We need money. Just send us a check. That is. So a great example. We had an Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia. I mean, it's unbelievable. They've got the Lewis and Clark diaries. They've got all of what they collected from Jefferson. I mean, it looks like a treasure trove. New guy comes in, corporate guy, and he says, look, we're in deep trouble. I mean, deep trouble. Talk about it. We don't have fire suppression for these collections. They got all the original Audubon prints and whatever. Go on and on. But he says, I figure $200 million. And I said, well, unless you know Bill Gates are planning to name this for him, it's not going to happen. I mean, you can't raise that kind of money for what you need to do. And so there was a new president at Drexel, really entrepreneurial guy, and so the thought was, why would Drexel want to take on all the assets of the Academy of Natural Sciences? And the reason is they went from having no natural history program to probably, at least their collection is certainly second to or maybe surpasses Harvard's now. And they now have a program that's probably one of the 3 best in the country. Ready to go. And they were able to take out all the inefficiencies, so they got rid of all the back office, all the operating costs, everything else. I mean, it was brilliant. And you had 2 new CEOs who got it. And then they brought their boards along. And of course the press wrote this up as kind of a wonderful partnership. What it was a complete takeover. I mean, Drexel took over the Academy of Natural Sciences. But these guys were so good that they because there was no upside to that, letting everybody believe that it was just kind of really soft pedal. And it's brilliant. And this organization now, the Academy, is doing fabulously, and Drexel's doing well. And then, we just had another one where the library took over the Rosenbaum, which was a wonderful collection of historic books, but I mean, it was limping and gasping. I guess the reason that I tell this story, that those wouldn't have seemed too sexy, sort of bailing out institutions, but because they had a brilliant strategy. They executed on it, and they had bold, gutsy leaders. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Tony?
Well, this is a sort of self-serving question, but I'll do it anyway. I'm still struck by your acute awareness of time and the way in which you build time expectations into your strategy. So I can't help but ask, if you were running a time-limited foundation, would you do anything any differently?
No, but I might have, depending on what that time limit was, I might have even more urgency. I might choose different kinds of projects. If I was going on a business in 7 years, I wouldn't have a strategy to create 10 parks in the sea, because it's going to take me 10 to 15 years or whatever. So it would skew maybe what I did if I needed, but it wouldn't change this notion of, because it's not so much the time limit, it's the discipline. You need to have a discipline. Time is one of our variables of discipline. If you don't have that, then what are your other disciplines that force you to make the hard decisions about what to do, how long to do it, and how to measure whether you were successful or not? Because if you don't have any of that discipline, then it's just like you're an income transfer.
You could change, as the Pew Charitable Trust is today, you could change your time expectations. You could change your timeline if things were going especially well, for example, or the road bent in ways you hadn't imagined. If you didn't have that option, would it just be a matter of changing the issue that you were working on, or would it be a matter of changing the way you evaluate progress if you had to end on a date certain?
Well, I would know that up front, right? I mean, it's
Yes,
not some
you would.
catastrophe that falls on me. I would know it. So I would say, look, I only have 10 years left. This institution is going out of business. It has X amount of resources, and we're going to do 5 big bets. But those 5 big bets would have to be able to be accomplished in the time limit that I had. So it would back me out of things that were going to have a longer requirement, because obviously I'm not going to exist, or I'm going to have to create a new organization that's going to go on after, and then give them some kind of wasting endowment. I would say for donors, somebody asked about new donors, and I would say 90% of the donors we deal with are the giving while living. I don't think you're going to see hardly any new large foundations that are set up in perpetuity. Now that my board thinks this is about the oddest thing they could ever imagine, but this donor I talked to you about in Texas, I mean, she said, who? And she called me up, she says, I'm going to live to 100. I said, well, that's really good. And she said, and I figure I got this amount of money, so I'm now calculating how much I have to get rid of each year. And she said, but there are 2 problems. I said, well, what's that? She says, well, my advisors say I ought to plan till 110 because I don't want to be really poor at the end. And she said, secondly, I keep making money. I said, man, that's tough. We have to figure this out, I mean, you got to love her sort of irreverence. But my point being that I don't know of any. And I mean, Buffett's money sunsetting. Gates' money, I believe, is
What's the grain lady in Minneapolis? Who set up a huge foundation?
No, hers is a perpetuity one. That's
rare.
rare. That's Cargill.
Cargill.
That's one of the rare ones. I mean, I talked to donors and they're ready. They want it. It's like, I just talked to a donor recently, 10 years after my death, I want it all gone.
Yeah. Well, what's really interesting about what you just said is that typically those who advocate spend down foundations say that that's what's needed in order to give the discipline to the decision making.
I don't buy that.
Well, that's my point. My point is, here you an example of a perpetual foundation, basically, that in fact has imposed discipline, which is what is thought to be the great benefit of the Spend Down Foundation. It gives you the discipline to focus.
What they're
And I don't
really,
believe it's
what they're really worried about is that they're going to have people come in that didn't know I'm doing weird things with their money. It has their name on it. I mean, that's what they're really worried about. And, they'll candidly say it. And I get that. I tell this great, no, I should stop. Oh, wait.
And then just to follow up, everyone's been focusing on your 60-40, 1 out of 10. So if you pick 1 out of 10 to hit 60-40, of the ones you choose, do you hit the 60-40? Do 60% of the things you choose
Oh,
are
yeah,
they successful?
Oh, well, I would hire.
Even better.
Yeah. Yeah, but, yeah, because to be candid, 60-40 is the lowest. A lot of things
That's
are
the bottom.
78. If it's lower than that, forget it. The opportunity cost is too high. But not everything's 60-40.
Right.
Some things are 80-20.
Wow.
That going in. I mean, and look, we take things, I like to think we don't do too much low-hanging fruit, but we take things that have ripened up. I mean, food safety. We knew that
Time was right.
time was right, so to speak, and, we knew the CDC, we knew we had the FDA, we knew we had champions in Congress, and we knew we'd had a bunch of kids that had died, and we brought their parents to, spinach and peanut
So
butter.
do you have things that are sitting and waiting for something to change so that
Oh, yeah,
those
well, a
odds
lot,
will change?
some things, timing is a big deal. So, we brought these kids, these parents, and we had them testify. We had them go office to office. We think that's not, my son has just died from spinach, and, we had them go to the White House. We were advocates to try and get this done, one I'll tell, sorry, I'm going too long. Foster care, and we wanted basically, the way the state incentive money works, the flows, you keep kids in foster care rather than getting them into permanency. Because states don't want the kids to get out of foster care. So we had a big program on foster care. It was a great success, but we had Thanksgiving. We had a table set up on the steps of Congress, on the Capitol Hill, where they were getting ready to go home. It was all set up for Thanksgiving, and all these kids sitting around it, foster kids, and they said, we wish we had a home to go to for Thanksgiving. Oh my God. And, had them bake cakes another time and take them to the congressman's office and say, I hope I could be have a home for my next birthday. We stopped, we were merciless. But it's all, it's all,
Merciless, but with great good humor.
yes.
And great
I know we're late, so did we get one last, somebody that was?
If the one last question, Marty, you get it. The last
Yeah,
question. If it's a great question.
I'm curious about what has informed your leadership style from your early years, either in your education, the intellectual origins, or formative experiences that you've had that has driven you to shape Pew the way that you have during your tenure?
Well, I thought about that because I wanted to go a little bit to the question earlier about personal experiences. When I came home from the first, this is going to be a longer answer than you want, but
That's okay.
when I came home from the first grade, my mother said to me, you can't go back to school. I was like, what? And she said, they closed the schools. And where I grew up, in the hoity-toity town of Charlottesville, Virginia, they closed the public schools for 4 years. And you have three choices. Your parents were rich enough to send you to private school. That was not mine. They shipped you off to live with a relative in another city. I'm not going to do that. Or they paid teachers with groceries to teach you in church basements, which is why I can't do my multiplication tables very well. But the point is, rather than integrate the schools, they closed them. Mm-hmm. And people think, it's ancient history. Well, it's not. And then I get ready to go to college. I come home and I say to my mom, my girlfriend says that I can go to the University of Virginia. And she says, no. Now, if you apply yourself in such, and then you go to graduate school, because when I went to apply to college, University of Virginia would not admit women. Now, I'm actually 102. No, really, this is like recent history. And long story, but it had all the way to the state Supreme Court. And then, they were like bringing women in droves. And so, but I remember those two, they were very personal experiences. And I thought, these are wrong. And so the notion of trying to make as much in your life as black and white, right and wrong, and trying to get those wrongs made into rights, I think those formative experiences, so when I say we're in the business of righting wrongs, I really think that is what we do, and speaking truth to power. So I do think that, that those formative experiences matter. I think they matter for all of us. And I think our parents matter a lot more than we give them credit, because my mother and father, but my mother was a great mentor. Fearless, I'll end with a football study. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. So my research was on minor head injury. This was really back in the dark ages. And everybody poo-pooed the fact that minor head injuries mattered. So I thought, well, I got to get a control group. I mean, you guys do scientific. Got to get a control group. So who do I know is going to get smacked in the head? And I retest them for cognition, memory, whatever. And then I post-test them after they get hit, because the brain's a funny organ. Well, football players. So I had 1,000 football players that I followed and waited till they got smacked in the head. I had all this data. It got published. So this notion with the NFL about who knew? Yeah, well, that you see how I got brought into this suit. Anyway, I mean, like it was only 40 years ago. I mean, it was who knew was their argument in the suit. So I tell this story. So it gets accepted for some big neurosurgical meeting, and they realized that not only they picked the plenary paper from a woman, there were no women in neurosurgery, and a nurse. So they called up my boss and said, this is like a problem. You just tell her you'll give the paper. And I was like, I said to my mom, I called her up, what am I going to do, whatever. And she said, I said, this is a real pickle. And she said, well, you betcha. She said, the first thing you have to decide is what you're going to wear. Which was a way to sort of, and then she said in the second instance, she said, you just march in there and tell them, And of course they couldn't take the paper back, so I got to give the paper. I don't remember what I wore, but I remember my mother was a great mother. That's probably a better question. So, sense of humor and good mentoring. Joel, thanks. I know we're over like 2 minutes.
No, listen, not to worry. This is more than worth it. But I would add another explanation. It's her southernness.
Well, that's a huge asset, particularly up north, where they think everybody from the south is slow, and you sort of perpetuate that and go ahead.
You once told me about the time that you got interviewed at the Union League Club. What's the club in Philadelphia?
Yeah,
that you got?
Yeah.
And what kind of shoes did you have on at that point?
Oh God, hard to know. But it being southern, But I say that listen, a lot of northerners have it too. But you can catch a lot of flies with honey. And humor is a great, and particularly self-deprecation has a lot to speak for it in terms of leadership. So.
Well, you certainly captured our hearts here today.
Oh.
It was really, really wonderful presentation, inspiring and stunning in many, many, many ways. So I thank you for doing
Thank you Invite me back.
Listen, you've got me a standing invitation.
Good. Well,
another 2 years. Wait, before you go, let me just say that the seminars for the rest of the we got on October the 23rd. Bob Gallucci, the president of the MacArthur Foundation.
Yeah, he's a food. I can